We get 1.5 million downloads a day of our open source project. Who did what? Because the human's not behind it anymore. So we were doing almost zero in revenue. Our revenues are north of 150 million. People say, well, what'd you do? What's your secret sauce? We're on a mission to make sure humans and machines cooperate to improve the human condition into the future. Be mission driven. Be on a mission.
What you're talking about, mission of are we really doing what's valuable to our customers?
I guess I always grew up knowing that profit was not an objective. It's just a measure. That night on a napkin at 1 a.m. in Savannah, Georgia, at the Hilton Hotel, we wrote down machine identity management. The category only exists in the mind. We categorize things because it makes it easy for us to process the world we live in. That's one far end of, if you create a category, you're the only one in it. That's special.
What kind of advice do you have for a leader, for CEO founder who is wanting to take that on of evangelizing a category plus a product?
It's a tough one because you've got to hold two thoughts in mind at the same time, or you're laying in bed or you're driving and you say, what if I'm wrong? Taking on the way people think and you're changing the way they think in a big way. Product market fit to me is you have an identifiable problem that somebody has, and there are some negative consequences today of that problem. And I will spend money on solving it. Go for durability, finding the problem that people really want to solve. It's a critical problem. Now, there is one thing that could change all of this.
I'm going to have to re-listen to this episode a few times and just think harder about all these things. Welcome to the Jess Larsen Show on innovation and leadership. On this episode, we've got Jeff Hudson. Jeff, thanks so much for making time for this.
Jess, great to see you. Glad to be here.
You run a pretty interesting company. Will you tell us about it and tell us who your ideal customer is?
Sure. So, little context. This is really important in the world as it's evolving right now, and you'll see why. There's two actors on a network, people and machines, and people identify themselves to machines, use usernames and passwords. Then machines have to identify themselves to each other, and there's, thousands, hundreds of millions of machines. One person talks to one machine, they all talk. But anyway, machines don't use usernames and passwords, they use machine identities. And we as humanity are very focused on managing and protecting human identities. We spend, $25 billion a year worldwide on that. And we're just getting started in recognizing the importance of machine identities. And the reason this is important is the number of machines, and machine is code, right? Machine learning is done by software. Machine is software. Machines are code. Didn't used to be, but then all got virtualized. So the number of machines is going through the roof, and the number of people is relatively flat. And identities are the prime directive. Compromising, stealing, misusing identities are prime directive of the bad guys. And so if they're not being managed and protected, you can imagine that the bad guys are now really ramping up their attacks using compromised, stolen, forged machine identities. So I've been big on identity. And all kinds of identity my whole life. I understood identity as a teenager growing up. Which cohort did you identify with? And my very first jobs coding, it was all about identity. And this was before it was about security. And then 14 years ago, I joined Venafi, and there's 17 of us in the company. Today, we could talk about where we are today, but it's all about identity, machine identity. And so that's what we do. We created this category called machine identity management. You can't do anything in a day without relying on Venafi, actually. Whether you get a cup of coffee, whether you get on an airplane, go to a bank, use insurance, trade stocks, use your passport, use a credit card, doesn't matter. Venafi you rely on Venafi to protect the machine identities that are involved in every single digital transaction in your life. So it's been quite a journey. So sorry I went a little longer than you intended on the story of the company.
No, I actually want to hear more about the story of the company. So can you talk to us about that growth? Again, getting onto the team back at 17 and now the CEO with all this growth. A quick Google search shows some pretty impressive AAR numbers and some valuation numbers. And how big is your staff now? And help us a little bit with where you've gone from 17 employees.
Sure, 17, and we call them team members. because nobody works for me. We work for customers. I mean, that's the reality. And I like to empower people. So I don't want them working for the man. I want them working for the team who's making customers successful. But we were 17 employees. We were doing almost zero in revenue. We had 5 unhappy customers. And so today, we got 5,000 customers worldwide. About 3,600 of them use our open source stuff. Others use, really tier 1 class enterprise apps that we deliver. Our revenues are north of 150 million. We've been profitable and durable for a long, long time, just because I learned the lessons over the years of how important that is. We get 1.5 million downloads a day of our open source project. 1.5 million downloads. I never would have imagined in my life that it would get to that point. And that download of Cert Manager is called, that gets used in the cloud native world. So all the things that are going on in clouds that use Kubernetes, they need things called machine identities, called TLS certificates. I don't know, we've got 90% market share in that space. So we've grown a lot. And people say, well, what'd you do? What's your secret sauce? First of all, we were an overnight success. Every year we were, when's this going to take off? When's this going to take off? When's this going to take off? And then finally someday people go, wow, look at what you've done. Oh, it's amazing growth. But every day we toil in the trenches of making customers successful. So you don't see that. And 14 years I've been doing this, and I never thought about, how is anybody going to get rich? I never thought about, building the value, other than we needed investment. So I had to think about that for investors. It was all about, we're on a mission. We're on a mission to make sure humans and machines cooperate and to improve the human condition into the future. That's a mission. And the way we do that is by securing and protecting the machine identities, managing the machine identities for the world's largest organizations. And so it's sort of, when you're mission driven, it's different than when you're mercenaries, right? And
well, speaking about those valuations and investors, I think the stats I saw was either maybe 2020 or 2021. You had the big investment kind of at the $1.1 billion valuation. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you think about this idea of growing a company over that billion mark, there's so many opinions out there, but there's very few people with experience. When you think of $1 billion lessons, what's one of the top ones that comes to mind for you?
Be mission driven. Be on a mission. Don't be trying to build $1 billion company. I mean, I've been in Silicon Valley since, late 70s, and always worked in growing companies, startups. And it's just, to me, is the one thing that almost every great company has, is that they're not focused on making a bunch of money for the individuals. They're focused on a mission, and they're just consumed by the mission. I mean, why did I get up at 3 this morning, jump on a telephone call? It wasn't to make more money. It's because it's part of the mission. We're helping to create a better world into the future, which has never become more important, because machine learning, software that's learning off of data, creates intelligence. And my God, if we don't have identities on that, so we know what's happening, we're in deep trouble as humanity. And so, this is just a recent phenomenon. It's been happening all along. Anyway, get right back to your question. Have a mission that you can get really excited about, because the ups and downs are phenomenal. The valleys are deeper than the Marianas Trench, and the highs are higher than the Mount Everest. But what keeps you going, to me anyway, and what I see in very successful companies over a long period of time, is a mission.
As you're talking, I kept thinking about the guy who built the first online music store long before iTunes and sold it for like $20 million. His name's Derek Sivers. He's got some great TED Talks and books and stuff. And he said, really worry about being of service, because money is a natural byproduct of something really service. And he says, what's funny enough is the money can actually be a gauge. You can know if you're a service, if people are trying to pay you for it or not. Like, that can actually be a measure. But he's like, make sure you got the cart, make sure you don't have the cart before the horse. Like, the point is, like what you're talking about, mission of like, are we really doing what's valuable to our customers? If you nail that, you don't have, it's kind of like, you don't really have to worry about the money so much. If you're doing something valuable and uncommon, the money's a byproduct. It's not the point. Is that close to what you're saying, or how would you say it better?
But I think you said it very well. Another way to say it is that if you are creating value for customers and they're seeing value, they're perceiving value, they're experiencing value, the measure of how much value are they getting is your profitability. Because if they're going to pay you more than it costs you to deliver that service, that delta profits is like a measurement of how well you're doing. If you got 1,000 companies doing all the same thing, your profit's going to be pretty low. So they don't see that you're doing something special, right? But if you're doing something special, it's hard for them to get it somewhere else, or it's not available somewhere else, or it costs them a ton to do it another way. They pay you that, and if you can, that's the thing. I guess I always grew up knowing that profit was not an objective. It's just a measure. It's just a measure. Are you doing something valuable? Are people willing to pay you more than it costs you to do it?
Yeah. When you think about that, like, I really think about this idea of like doing something special. You know, Warren Buffett says he wants to own a business that has a big moat around it and high walls around that castle, right? When you think about doing something special that not 1,000 other companies can do, and some CEOs listening today, some founders listening today, and they're saying like, we're kind of special, but we could probably become more special. If they want to ask themselves the hard questions about creating something, again, valuable, but even more scarce, valuable that would cost even more to do another way, what kind of questions should they be asking themselves to kind of increase the specialness, which, as you said, profits would be a natural byproduct?
So I can go all the way to one end of the spectrum, and we're a case study for it. And at the end of the spectrum is you go create a new category that is brand new, that nobody else is in, and nobody else is delivering that service, that value. And so we decided to create a category. And you know, when I joined, there was these things called certificate lifecycle management systems. There were CAs that had certificates and keys, and it was all not accessible to the common person. I mean, this was the high priesthood that took care of this stuff, right, in the early days. And so I had a bunch of our customer CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, together at an advisory board meeting that I hold periodically. And we all were talking about how hard it is to communicate why this is so important and why we're, investing so many resources in it. And one of the guys said, who was an identity access management guy, human side, he said, well, look, these are just machine identities. And what we're doing is managing machine identities. And so it was like, ding. And all of a sudden everybody said, okay, so there is nobody that talks about managing machine identities. We talk about human identities, but we don't talk about, he said, this is a category. And so that night on a napkin at 1 a.m. in Savannah, Georgia, at the Hilton Hotel, we wrote down machine identity management, still have the napkin, and machine identity management. Then we ran over to one of the industry analysts and said, hey, look, this is what this is. This is what's happening. And they laughed, right? Because they like to create the categories they don't want a company to. So we created this category. And the thing is, a category, and this is really something that most people understand, a category only exists in the mind. We categorize things because it makes it easy for us to process the world we live in. And so if you can take something new and say, oh, well, that's a talk show host, right? Or if you take something new, me, when you first met me, oh, that's some CEO guy that's been doing this for a while. You put me in a category. But we created this new category called machine identity management, and we turned the problem into the category name. And then we went about educating people as to what was in that category, and the problems and the solutions, and they didn't exist. So from a categorical perspective, we created this category, and then we built it. And funny thing is, I was at a Google presentation the other day, and they had machine identities and machine identity managers all over their slides. I've got the napkin. And so it's very fulfilling to see that that works, because that is hard stuff. Everybody laughs at you. Everybody says, well, that's just this, right? They try and recategorize it. Competitors, customers, because humans just like their existing categories. The new categories, I got to either move some aside or get rid of one, or I got to recategorize. So you're working on people's minds. And it's been a heck of a journey. That's one far end of, if you create a category, you're the only one in it. That's special. The other end is you are better, right? And you're better. And where a lot of people get screwed up, I think, companies get screwed up, is they think they're better, not that the customer thinks they're better. And better is a perception. Better isn't like, how do you measure better? Feeds and speeds, this thing is faster than that. You can measure it. That's one thing. But a lot of the things we do are experiential, or they're other things. So what's better? It's what's the perception that the customer has. And so, are you taking care of a problem they really want to take care of? And will they choose yours because it's better than their alternatives and substitutions? And I found out that this is what they teach in business school. I never went to business school.
Well, I actually love both of those points you just made. I don't have the experience you have, so I try to read it. I try to listen to a lot of books, and that I get some of my favorite authors on the show. And to your second point, just had a professor from Northwestern on named Albert Laszlo Barabasi. He wrote this great book called The Formula, and he says the harder the performance is to measure, the greater the importance on perception. I mean, he uses slightly different words that you're saying, and and so it's like so in line. And then on the category side, like I love books, Positioning by Jack Trout, Different by Young Mi Moon, Differentiator by Jack Trout, Blue Ocean Strategy. There's a bunch of these, but the guys who wrote Play Bigger, I had one of those co-authors on, and this idea.
Who came on? Who came on? Al?
No, who's the journalist?
Oh yeah, the name escapes me. But
I feel so bad. I want to say Scott.
It was Al and
yeah. I feel so bad that I can't name his name because I really like the interview. But like the economics of creating category and maintaining that leadership as category king are just undeniable, right? When you think about essentially signing up for double the work of like not just evangelizing your product, but evangelizing the category as well, which obviously can produce more than double the results. Obviously, look at the outside success you guys have had. What kind of advice do you have for a leader, for CEO founder who is wanting to take that on of evangelizing a category plus a product? When it comes to category creation, I loved your tip about name the category, the problem. I think that's ideal. I love that you're like talking to customers and you're getting words that are already in their vocabulary. You're getting a concept that works for them. What else would you add to that?
So there's, for everything, there's a mindset that starts with a mindset, and it's a tough one because you've got to hold two thoughts in mind at the same time. You have to listen to the customer to figure out, what problems they have and how is this problem manifest for them. But you cannot listen to the customer and think that they're right about the category because it's new. So you have to understand where they are, and then at the same time you have to understand, and I'm going to change where they are to where I want them to be. And so it's really hard because we're accustomed to, customer's always right, listen to the customer input. A/B testing is never going to create a category. It's just not, because there's no B. The B is the category, right? And so it's like you got to have this belief that you understand it and that you're willing to take no and hear a million people tell you you're crazy. Because if you're not willing to do that, if you're a people pleaser and you want to hear the customer says, oh yeah, okay, yeah, well I see, yeah, we're looking for something like that. I mean, you're in the wrong place in terms of category creation. But if you can get over that, then the next biggest thing is to make sure that, and Play Bigger is a great book, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I've done this once or twice before, not knowing I was playing bigger. And so when I did read the book, it made so much sense to me. And in fact, when we said we're going to create a category, we did a company-wide book club on Play Bigger. Everybody in the company read the book. Then what you have to do is you got to turn everybody in the company into an evangelist, right? And go out and evangelize this category. Well, how do you get change management's tough? And I think we're like 150 people then. And so what we did was we broke into groups at a big company meeting. We had everybody produce like a 2-minute video, like a sketch. We brought in, video producers. This was back in the day before all this stuff was easier on your phone. And they did little skits. They created a skit, they did the skit, and then we had a Academy Awards ceremony at night. And all we wanted to do was implant in everybody in the company that this is a category. It must have worked. Because then what they have to do is they have to go out from there, right? And then, so it's concentric circles. First of all, you had to get everybody in the company, an evangelist. And we had a bunch of people that said, no, this isn't right. That's not what customers want. They want this, which is the same thing 20 other companies are doing. I'm like, I'm not interested in that. That's not the problem to solve. And you get some really tough conversations when really strong, good people say, that's not right. We don't want to do that. And if everybody's not going the same direction, the other hard part is you're willing to let go of people that don't want to buy into the mission.
So I want to talk about navigating that. This idea of like, listen to the customers, treat your peers like they're smart, consider those opinions, and then still having the guts to trust yourself on something that not everybody else is agreeing on. When you think about navigating that, what tips do you have?
Well, when you go down this path, first of all, realize that you're going to have times when you just stop walking through an airport, or you stop walking down a hallway in your house, or you're laying in bed, or you're driving, and you say, what if I'm wrong? And so that's going to happen. And it happens a lot because a lot of people are telling you you're wrong. And what's the definition of an insanity? When everybody sees something some way different than you see it, right? And so, this is unsettling. And so, first of all, be ready to take that on, one. Number two is no great thing was ever accomplished or ever achieved. If it was about making money for an individual, so it better be a missionary kind of a thing. We're making the world a better place, not just because I'm richer and I'm going to donate to charities, right? No, really, we're going to solve a big problem for humanity, which we are. And so if you can anchor into that, then you got a way to get people to go that way. You get them to see the vision, and you get the really strong supporters to be evangelists, and you run it. It's like a political campaign, or it's probably like creating a religion. I don't know. I've never done one of those, but it's that kind of a thing. You got to be ready for that, and you cannot ever stop internally, because customers are always saying, "Yeah, I don't understand that. That's not right." Everybody has an opinion, right? So you're going to hear constantly the customers are saying you're wrong. Well, that changes a lot of people's minds. So people go back to the way the customers see it. You're trying to pull them forward. It's just, you almost got to be borderline crazy. And I think the book actually said that. Play Bigger said that. You got to be a little bit crazy to do that, because you're taking on the way people think, and you're changing the way they think in a big way. So understanding what's going to happen, and then not forgetting that you've got to keep growing the concentric circles of believers in this, and people that can actualize it, and realize that that's always going to deteriorate close to the middle. So it's not one and done or 10 and done. It's constantly doing that, and it gets tiring. It really does. It still happens, a lot less now, but it still happens where people say, why are we doing this? And we have to bring them through the whole learning curve. It's like we got to take them from in the fetus all the way to full-grown adults. They have to go the whole thing quickly. It's really interesting. I'm not going to write the book because the book's been written.
Well, it's fascinating to think of, because I actually liked your political or religious explanation there. This idea of can you get converts to this way of thinking, right? Because you think about, I don't know, the analogy that was coming up in my head is like an electromagnet. It's like You've got the people on this side saying, oh no, you're just this thing we already know about. And then you've got your conviction on the side of like, no, we are a different category. And it's kind of like, who can crank the wheel the fastest to have the most electricity for that magnet of like, am I more committed? Am I more committed to converting people to this is the category? Or are they more committed to the like, oh no, you're nothing special? And it kind of seems like, that it seems like your level of commitment and your endurance to keep that level of commitment up is helped create the converts. That's
yeah, it really does. And so I was just thinking as you were talking, it is a political campaign, and it is having a vision, and it is having some strong supporters that will then help get others that are maybe neutral to become strong supporters of this vision. It's identifying the detractors, and it's neutralizing the detractors. Sometimes you can't win them over. You can't. I mean, they're detractors for a reason you don't know. So you got to move them out of the way if you're going to move it forward. And so this deteriorates pretty quickly into things like what's going on in Russia right now, right? And it's like, whoa, you got to have good intent. You got to be good intent behind it because you're messing with people's heads. And I think this is something some CEOs don't give a lot of thought to, which is, I mean, this, we in this role, the role I do, I'm responsible for a whole lot of people and what happens to them, not only in their own life, but in others' lives. Now, they have choice, they can choose, et cetera, but I got to be honest, I got to be transparent, I got to be open, I got to have the right personal intentions, or this thing goes off the rails. And that's, becomes a cult kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk part two here. So if part one is, create a category that could be, a $1 billion category, it's largely addressable. You could serve a lot of people with it, right? There's plenty of folks who started a category and then didn't stay category king. I mean, Jawbone did it more than once, right? When you think about creating something so great that you start out as category king and you stay category king, how would you define product market fit?
So, current problem, and you're talking generically, how would I define product market fit? Okay. So, product market fit to me is you have an identifiable problem that somebody has, and there are some negative consequences today of that problem. And there is a point of view of a future condition where that problem is solved, and there's some positive outcomes. And the required capabilities to get from the current situation with the negative consequences to the positive outcomes, those required capabilities are sort of the product, right? And then the question is, then the other thing is, because product market fit is not single dimension. Product market fit, given all the other problems people have, because you can have product market fit for a problem that people don't find important to solve, and your company goes out of business. So you got to figure out which problems are, top of the mind for a customer, which means either there's a lot of personal pain with this problem for somebody, or there's, organizational pain, like there's a lot of money it's costing them, or there's a lot of money they could be making. But it's like, is this a high priority problem? Because if it's not, why are you doing it? Because people have the fund me line, which has gone way, way up, by the way, recently, because money costs money. It used to be, Silicon Valley grew because it was declining cost of capital over the last 40 years. Now that's turned back around. It's going to change. It's not for no free money. So in a company, in an organization, they're saying, every dollar now, every dollar, I've got an alternative. I could put it in treasuries, or I could put it somewhere else. I'm going to get a 10% return. Why am I spending this and we're not going to get a return on this for 4 years? Because our customer acquisition costs now are, the CAC is or the customer acquisition costs are out of sight. Long-term value is nothing. Unit economics, why are we going to invest in this? Well, that thinking wasn't around for the last 4 or 5 years of Silicon Valley. It was just throw money at it. Why? Money was free. Venture capitalists had capital at almost zero cost. So bet on everything. The whole world grew up around that. So anyway, it's knowing where the value line is. This is an important problem to solve, and I will spend money on solving it. That's problem selection, and then product market fit is what I talked about earlier. Was that kind of clear? I jumped around a little bit there.
I think it's great. I actually just want to ask more about it. Thinking about this idea of figuring out, does this pain matter? Are they willing to pay for it? Right? That you brought up. I mean, I love the example you said of you are gathering your ideal customers, these CISOs. You were gathering them all together already. You were getting together with them. What advice do you have for high growth CEOs of like getting the real honest truth from this high value customer? What are other methodologies or approaches?
So another great book, Crossing the Chasm. I'm sure you've read it, right? Jeffrey Moore, he's really good at characterizing phenomenon. There's the academics don't talk about it like he does. He makes it very popular and understandable. They talk about adoption, right? So I think the most important thing is to not have happy ears, because you can through selection bias find people that like the idea and this is great. We want to talk about, we want to look at it, blah, 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 blah. And, you can chase that forever. Oh, it's just one more thing, et cetera, et cetera. So can't have happy ears, got to be really skeptical. And the best way to get that, I think, I know, is to at some point say, okay, so at this point, what we have to do is you have to pay us money for this. Why? Because we're investing in it and you think it's going to provide value for you. And so let's calculate the value. And so we will give you a deal, but whatever, but let's agree on the value it's creating. And then you got to pay us for this. And if, by the way, if we don't deliver it, you don't have to keep paying us, right? We'll deliver it. But you got to get that past that point where people say, that's a great idea. It's a great idea. It's a great idea. I need one more thing, to pay you for it, which is once they do that, all the systems that say, yeah, this is valuable have kicked in. And then if you don't get to that, you're never going to have a successful product. So try and get that fleshed out early. And that's not comfortable to do. And the technologists don't like doing that in the company. And it really brings up an interesting point, because if you have a company that's kind of, things are run rate, you need what I call administrators to run that, to make it more efficient, more effective, and run it, grow it, right? But then in the world we're in today, things are changing so fast that what was a problem yesterday may or may not be a problem tomorrow. What the solution was that people chose today or yesterday may or may not be what they choose in the future. So you have to be looking to the future for where these things are going. And the administrators can't look into the future. The administrators can only turn the crank and turn it faster, right? You need figure-outers. You need people that can figure it out. Well, administrators like to squash those guys because those guys spend money and they're not getting any return yet because they're still figuring it out. But that's the future, right? So that's back to the point you said, well, how come some companies don't last? They have first mover advantage, or they create a category and they don't last because they stop figuring it out. They all turn in to be administrators. How do we get more efficient and effective? And so that's a real challenge to run a company, is to have the administrators and think that way and create your profits and your the right level of profitability, EBITDA, and efficiency. And at the same time, you're figuring stuff out, because they're two different mindsets.
I'm going to have to re-listen to this episode a few times and just think harder about all these things.
Too much complexity flying around here?
No, it's more like the simplicity on the other side of complexity, where what you're saying is actually quite simple, but there's so many implications and nuances to it that as I think about adapting it to our companies, I want to sit still with my phone on airplane mode and try to think what's underneath that to get to what you're saying are such clear statements. I just know that there's all these things that have gone into you getting to the point that concept is clear for you.
So I was a programmer, and you can't get more. And back when I learned to program, you can't get very much closer to a 1 and a 0 than I was, right, at the assembly language and sometimes in binary code. So I can get down to that most fundamental level. But what I've learned is that it's the people that can grab a crayon on a big whiteboard and draw big pictures that give context. That's hard. The details are easy. I mean, let's dive into the details, right? And we'll go, that's tangible, and we can all work on, we'll look at the details. People miss the big picture.
Well, most of our businesses have a lot of administrators who are good at any, like for any detail, we can probably pull up an administrator in our business who can give you a lot of details about that thing. But how do all these moving pieces together for a profitable organization that is adapting for the future and all those things is less common, right? Your figure-outers. I think that should be the name of your book.
Figure-outers?
Yeah. By the way, if people want to look at the service, what's the URL for the company? Or if they want to follow you, where should they be? Where on social media is the best? LinkedIn or where's good?
I'm on LinkedIn. So it's easy, Jeff Hudson. And then the URL is Venafi.com. And you can learn more about the company. And we overeducate people on our website. So there's all kinds of places people can spend time digging around. And it is a fascinating world we live in because, I mean, if you think of what's happening now with machines and machine learning, and if there is an intelligence that's created, which is, artificial general AI, I mean, that's a ways off. Artificial narrow AI is pretty close. In fact, we're using it a lot. We're doing a lot with it. What entity came to that conclusion? I mean, our whole society, human society, is built around identity, attribution, responsibility, accountability. You get a birth certificate when you're born, and courts spend a lot of time trying to figure out who did it and look at evidentiary stuff and look at DNA and all that other stuff. Then it goes back to the Code of Hammurabi, which was, blood guilt. If blood is spilled, something's responsible. Somebody's responsible. My favorite story on that, and our whole Western legal system is based on it, is in one of the Greek Olympic Games, the javelin thrower reared back and unleashed a towering throw of the javelin, and a little child ran across the target area, and the javelin struck the child and killed the child. No, it's terrible. This was like, 3000 BC or whenever it was. Well, the courts put on trial the javelin thrower, the child, and the javelin itself. Who was responsible? What was responsible? Our society's built on this. So we're generating things with intelligence that now can act and act together. And how do we attribute who did what? Because the human's not behind it anymore.
So I need to ask you, we should probably have an offline conversation, but at Child Rescue Association, our charity, we're working on a new program right now. We're raising money for scholarships for law enforcement officers to learn really advanced skills in going after like gangs and drug cartels and organized crime who are not just selling drugs, but selling children and women as well. Okay. And one of our pushes in there is for digital evidence collection. There's some great counter-trafficking folks, especially out in Denver, who've really been doing well with this. And it makes it so, if you can get enough data to prove the crime that's digital evidence, this phone was here at this time, this happened here, this got captured that way, you may not even need to get the kid to testify in court at all in some cases, which, I mean, way better for the kid to not have to look in the face of this person who's been hurting him for all these years. It can actually be a stronger case because it feels a little more black and white when it's digital instead of someone's opinion.
More objective.
Yep.
Objective. Right.
Right. A lot of times people who've been through that level of trauma, they change their mind about wanting to testify and all of a sudden the whole case can fall apart. Right. So anyways, we got to get some advice for our law enforcement officers on digital device identity. So,
well, it's device, and then in terms of think about how easy it is now to actually fake evidence. So can we trust this? What's the provenance of this?
Will it hold up in court?
Will it hold up in court? Because is this real or not? And so this gets back to, if machines, artificial intelligence is, I type in something like, create some evidence that shows I was at Burger King and, and wherever, at this time, and then a video comes out. How do we prove? And so this notion of provenance in the digital world means identities in code, because code does this, or identities of content that does this. How do you trust any software at all? And we have a big push for all the world's corporations to make sure they stop running unauthorized code. And most of them run unauthorized code today. So it's like, they let anybody into the organization. No, you got to go through security, sign the logbook, your host or your escort has to sign in. They just allow anybody to download code and run it, or create their own code and run it. There's so much that we have to deal with as a society. And I'm happy because I love being in the middle of it. It's just really fun.
Yeah, you can tell you enjoy what you do. I know we're kind of winding up for time. Maybe, thinking about this, building $1 billion business, 150 million plus in annual revenue. What's another principle that you would have for CEOs that are trying to get to that 150 million a year in revenue?
Durable from very early on. If you are, if you've got a business model that says, I need to spend money, and unit economics, we don't have time to go into it, but if unit economics means you've got to spend $4 to get $1 in revenue, and we're just going to do that in a while until we get the network effect, I'm really skeptical of those methodologies, because I think they were born out of a time when there was a continually declining cost of capital. And, there's just a few things that have become massively network effect kinds of things, and people try and replicate that. But you better, if you're going to swing for the fences and go for that, you're going to have to find out early, because you can spend a lot of capital. And if it doesn't cost you much, it's okay, but it costs something now. So go for durability, finding the problem that people really want to solve. It's a critical problem. And then figure out what it takes to solve it in a way that they'll choose that solution, your solution, over all alternatives and substitutes. Man, get profitable fast. And I think this world we're in right now is going to last for another 20, 30 years. There's no easy flip to switch or switch to flip that, like lowering interest rates or buying back securities. It's not going to happen. Now, there is one thing that could change all of this, which is if we figure out a way to make energy free. That changes the entire equation on the planet, right? Non-polluting free energy, that changes everything. But that's made of unobtainium today. So given that hasn't hit, that's the classic business plan I see a lot, which is we're going to do this and this, then this miracle occurs. And then we're $1 billion profitable company. Yeah.
Well, then maybe one addition there. If someone does do that, and now it's this time to where the CEO needs to be landing these large enterprise accounts or training their enterprise reps to land these big multi-million-dollar accounts. What's one principle of that process that you would emphasize for folks?
In a large enterprise, it's a campaign. You've got multiple decision makers, you've got multiple influencers, and you have to understand that. It's not just one person anymore makes the decision. So back to what we talked about earlier, understand who your supporters are, who the neutrals are, who the detractors are, and mount a campaign to get more votes.
I love it. That's great. Well, listen, this has been tons of fun. Thanks for making time to do this.
Oh, you're welcome, Jess. I love your questions and I love your insight. And I just watched the wheels spinning, and we haven't rehearsed this. So this is new to you too. So good job.
Thanks so much. Okay, bye everyone.